everybody, welcome to my channel. My name is Lubaba and today I'm going to be talking about all the books that I have read this year so far. So far this year I have read 21 novels and the rest of them are all comic books and manga, which are like 23 other books. So today I'm just going to be talking about the novels that I've read so far because I know it's going to be a pretty long video. So I'm going to be trying to make it as brief as I can. So without further ado, let's just get into it. The first book I read this year was One of Us is Next by Karen McManus. This is her follow-up novel to One of Us is Lying, which was a really amazing book to read. This is essentially a YA mystery thriller following a girl named Maeve and her two other friends, Knox and Phoebe. This is a multi-perspective book, so we see Maeve, Phoebe, and her friend Knox as they start their high school. At the beginning of high school, the three of them start getting these messages on their phone, which are basically instructions given over phone, asking them to do certain things. Otherwise, a secret about them would be revealed. Now, this is very intense because if they do not do as they are asked to do, a very horrifying secret about them comes out. So this was a very intense book actually, and I really enjoy reading the way Karen McManus writes. Her writing style is very amazing. It's like always a page turner for me, at least. I loved reading it, but I think the ending sort of messed up the entire storyline a bit. I mean, I liked it until the ending. Like, the ending was a little bit messed up and I don't really want to talk about it, but so yeah, I rated this one a 3 stars. The next book I read this year was A Perfect Cornish Summer by Philippa Ashley. This one is actually a adult romance / fiction chick lit type of book. This follows a girl named Sam Lovell who is born and brought up in the small Cornish town of Porthmellow. So every year Sam organizes this festival, this summer festival, which is basically the main highlight of the year. So this is the 10th time she will be organizing this festival, the 10th anniversary of the festival, and she wants to make it perfect. But unfortunately, at the very last minute, the headlining chef for the food festival decides to back off. Now, Sam and her friends do not have the headlining chef, and they're basically stuck. But to save the day, another Porthmellow local, Gabe Matthias, who left Porthmellow 10 years ago, comes up and says that he will be the headlining chef. Now, he's a very famous chef, and he's been working in London for the last 10 years, and he suddenly returned. But Sam isn't quite happy to see Gabe back again because apparently Sam and Gabe have some history. I'm sorry, I said mystery. Sam and Gabe have some history. So yeah, well, basically we learn about Sam and Gabe's story and what happened to them, why they fell apart, and we learn a little bit about the other characters. Chloe and her story was one of my favorite. There's another character who's actually Sam's friend, Chloe. We see Sam's sister, Zenner, and a couple of other characters. This is a very cozy read actually, and it's a pretty big book for a chick lit fiction type of book, but I did enjoy reading it a lot, and yeah, well, I rated this a 3 star. The next one I read was It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover. Colleen Hoover isn't actually one of my favorite authors. I don't really like her books at all. But when I picked this up, this is why I never tried to understand what this was about. I never even read the synopsis. I just thought I didn't want my hopes to be that high when I was reading this. And towards the beginning, I was sort of upset with the book, but I guess the ending was worth it all. So this book is essentially about this girl named Lily Bloom. Lily was born and brought up in Plethora, Maine. And after graduating from college, she moves to Boston, where she starts off her own business. Lily meets this neurosurgeon named Ryle Kincaid in Boston, and Lily and Ryle start to have, a sort of romance, and they get together, and they're a couple. We see their story. They have a pretty nice story going on, but Ryle is sort of like a dominating character. I do not really like Ryle, and everything goes fine until someone from Lily's life back in Maine returns, and now Lily meets this guy named Atlas in Boston. Atlas was actually Lily's first love, and a lot of memories come back up. She starts thinking about Atlas, but when Ryle finds out what her relationship with Atlas was back in her home, he sort of gets worked up, and the story starts to get a little intense. So yeah, I liked reading about this a lot. I liked Lily. I think Atlas was one of my most favorite characters ever. Atlas is such an amazing character. Although we don't get to read from his point of view, we don't really get to see Atlas much, but I did enjoy reading any part that included Atlas. There were certain parts that I really liked, where, for example, there was a part where Lily used to read these letters she wrote to Ellen DeGeneres but never really sent. These letters when she were 15 years old or something, and I really enjoyed reading that. The letters felt like they were she was 15 when she wrote those, and I could actually understand what she was talking about at that age. It was really nice to read. And the ending especially, it just melted me. Like, I was so happy the way the book ended. So yes, this is a great book. I rated this 3-star as well. The next book I read this year was actually a historical fiction, and is probably my favorite book of the year, or it is so far. And the book is Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I will put up the cover here because I do not own the book at the moment. So when I picked this book up, I had no idea what it would be about, really. I just picked it up because I saw a review where someone said that the audiobook for this book was apparently very good. So I started listening to the audiobook, and I got so hooked to the story that I actually read it twice. Anyway, so the story is basically about this band called Daisy Jones and the Six, which was formed around 1960s, and they were really famous during that period, and they reached their peak of their career during the late 1960s and the early 1970s until they suddenly broke. Nobody knew why the band broke apart, what happened. They were like a rock band, and they were sort of like the Fleetwood Mac / the Beatles vibe. And nobody knew why they broke up. And 40 years later, today, in present time, in 2017 I think, in present time, the band members from back then come together for an interview, and they start talking about what it was like and how the band was formed, what happened, the songwriting process, how they recorded, the photo shoot for the albums, the album tour and everything, and why in the end the band suddenly fell apart during the tour, in the middle of the tour. I think I loved reading about the band so much. It started to feel like it was a real band. I loved the characters. They were so flawed, but they were still so understandable, and it felt like the characters really wanted to redeem themselves, like they wanted to make a difference, and I just loved it. I loved it so much. I rated this book a complete 5 out of 5 stars. It was one of the best books that I've read this year, and I think so far. So the next book that I read after Daisy Jones, obviously I was so excited to have read a book like that. I decided to pick up another book by the same author, which is The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This was a book about this actress who was famous in the early 1950s, 60s period, and she rose to fame at that time. She was this very brooding actress, mysterious. Everybody just knew her outside. Nobody knew what she was really like. But then suddenly she disappears completely off the face of the, television world, and nobody knows what happened to Evelyn. But everybody just knows her from her outside story. She married 7 people, and then she received an Oscar. Her life was like this huge mystery. Until years later, in the present time, Evelyn is old, and she now decides that she wants somebody to write her memoir. So she shares her real story with this person named Monique. And Monique is supposed to take her story and write it as a memoir, as a book. So this is sort of like an oral retelling as well. We see Monique interviewing Evelyn as Evelyn is telling her story. The story unfolds what happened in Hollywood, what her life was like, and what was the reason that she married all these men that she married, the 7 people, and her real story. So the book is actually The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. It just felt so amazing. I thought it was really one of the best books I'd read. I still like Daisy Jones better, but I think that Taylor Jenkins Reid is an amazing author, and I really, really enjoyed reading her book. So the next book I read this year was part of this series. So this is An Ember in the Ashes by Sabaa Tahir. I really, really enjoyed reading this book. I thought this was a great way to start the series. This is a fantasy young adult series, and so this book follows the story of this girl named Laia. So this is in a fantasy world where Laia is part of this faction called the Scholars. The Scholars are believers of, say, scripts and education, and then there is another part of faction which is called the Marshals. Now, Marshals only believe in war and fighting and basically assassination. The Marshals overtook the Scholar empire 500 years ago, and they have since been ruling the Scholars. Now the Scholars have been pushed back to the outskirts of town, and basically there aren't many scholars left anymore. And if anybody knows that the scholars, there are any scholars alive that still read and are like practicing somehow, they are directly killed. The only scholars that are alive today are the ones that are the slaves of the Marshall families. So basically Laia, it starts with Laia, who is a 17-year-old girl who is also a scholar and lives with her grandparents and her brother. One night, this assassin group called the Masks. The Masks are a type of martial assassins. So the Masks can come to her house and abduct her brother and kill her grandparents right in front of her eyes. Laia is absolutely broken, and she decides that she has to rescue her brother no matter what happens. To rescue her brother, Laia decides to enter this academy called the Black Cliff Academy, where she works as a slave under the commandant of the academy. The commandant is like the director of the academy. So she joins the commandant's place as a slave, and she starts digging up information on her brother. On the other hand, there is a student of the Black Cliff Academy called Elias. We read from Elias's point of view as well. Elias Viturius is actually a mask who graduates as a mask very recently, but he does not like the fact that he's a mask. He does not want to be a mask. He does not like killing people for no reason at all. The masks are violent, and he is not a believer of the Marshall Empire, not as strongly as most of his other friends. So we see Elias struggling to understand his identity and whether or not he wants to be a part of this brutal empire. And we see Laia trying to collect information on her brother's whereabouts. So at one point Laia and Elias meet each other, and Elias has been chosen as one of the aspirants for the 4 trials that will decide whether or not he will be the next emperor of the Marshall Empire. Now, Elias is not sure if he wants to become the emperor, but then he thinks that maybe he can bring about some change if he tries. So Elias decides to go on these quests to do the tasks. So this book basically focuses on Elias's 4 tasks and Laia's life in the Black Cliff Academy as she tries to collect information on her brother. And the story ends at a very, how do I say this? It was a very sudden point for me. Like, I did not expect that coming, but I really enjoyed reading that. So yes, this was a 4-star read for me. I really enjoyed this book. I have some pages tabbed. I really enjoyed this book, and well, okay. Then the next book I read was the sequel to An Ember in the Ashes, which is A Torch Against the Night, also by Sabaa Tahir. This is the second book in the series. There are 2 more books. The 4th one isn't out yet, and the 3rd one is Reaper at the Gates, which I still haven't read yet. I am planning on reading it very soon, as I think the 4th one will be released sometime later this year. Anyway, so this book follows the journey of Laia and Elias after they leave the Black Cliff Academy. Laia escapes, Elias helps her, and now they're out on a quest to finally find Laia's brother, who she was looking for from the very beginning of the series. And yeah, this is a completely different type of story than this one, but I equally enjoyed both books. I think I liked this one better. Torch Against the Night had something more. We see another character, Helen Aquila. Helen Aquila is actually Elias Viturius' best friend and also one of the other masks. In the first book, Helen is sort of like a robotic character, like she's computerized. She understands nothing but what the Martial Empire has brainwashed into her head. But in the second book, she sort of gains this pace in her character development and she changes a bit. I really enjoyed reading Helen's point of view in the second book. So the second book is told from three perspectives. There is Helen, there is Laia, and there is Elias. And the first one was from two perspectives. So I really enjoyed reading this one. I think this was a 5-star read for me. I really, really loved it. Okay, so the next few books that I will be talking about will all be just put up here on the screen. I am not at my home. My bookshelves are not around me, so I do not have the books with me here. But anyways, I will start just talking about them. The next book I read this year was In 5 Years by Rebecca Surley. In 5 Years is a adult time travel fiction. This follows the story of this girl named Dani Cohen, who is actually a lawyer. She goes to her interview. She's been waiting to get this job for all her life, so she goes to this interview in 15th December 2020, where she was asked, where do you see yourself in the next 5 years? And she basically knows all the answers. She knows where she wants to be in the next 5 years. She has everything decided because she is that type of girl who plans out every second. She knows how long it takes her to wash herself up, to get a shower, to wake up from bed, to eat. She knows everything. She knows everything, or so she thought. The night of her interview, she goes to bed and wakes up almost 5 years later. I mean, when she wakes up that night, she sees that the time is different. She is in 15th December 2025 instead of 2020. And the person she's waking up next to is not her boyfriend. She doesn't know who he is, but it all feels so real that she freaks out. And she's completely freaked out. But that night she goes back to sleep and wakes up back again in the original time, which is 15 December 2020. For the first couple of months, she is completely freaked out because that memory, that dream was so real. But then she slowly forgets about it because she thinks, oh, it's just a dream. 4.5 years later, she finally comes across that man who she saw in her dream. And she starts to think that, oh my God, this was probably not just a dream. Maybe she sort of had a premonition. Maybe she time traveled. So yeah, this was the basic plot of the story. But I mean, the story does not really follow the plot as it is told. The story is like a more important from the perspective of, the friendship. And Dani's friendship with her best friend, Dani's relationship with her boyfriend, everything that goes on over the 5 years' time. It's really Dani's story, but yeah, the main point, or the point where it all started, was when she first had that dream 5 years ago, and then 5 years later her life completely changes. I think it was a very good book. I mean, reading that book, I questioned a lot of things I knew. I mean, 5 years ago I had no idea where I'd be right now, but here I am. So yeah, it's sometimes good to question the things that you do not know about or you're not sure, but what are you doing? What choices are you making? Your life may be completely different in the future. That's what I thought after reading the book. So yes, this was like a 3.25 star read for me. The next book I read this year was Radio Silence by Alice Oseman. Again, I'll put it up here somewhere. Radio Silence was a book I was really excited to read because I had heard so many good things about Radio Silence. I did not know where to start on how many good things I'd heard. I was just so unsure. But then when I started Radio Silence, I didn't really know much about it. But Radio Silence is basically about the story of this girl named Frances. Frances has always been a study machine. Everything she cared about was basically study, and grades. Her one target has always been getting into Cambridge University. Frances likes one other thing, which was this podcast on YouTube called University. University was a podcast that was made / narrated by this person, this mysterious person named Radio Silence. Frances absolutely loved Radio Silence and his voice, and she had been following the podcast for the last 2 years. Of course, that was her before something happened. 2 years ago, she had one friend named Carrie's Last, who was also her next door neighbor. Then suddenly Carrie's disappeared. Frances's life was always different ever since then. I mean, she's always been an introvert. She did not fit into any group of friends in her school yet. Her next door neighbor, on the other hand, was this boy named Alid Last. Alid Last was actually Carrie's twin brother. And Alid and Frances sort of have this sort of friendship, a bonding over university, and they go on their own journey, I suppose. There is a lot of story. There are some male romances in here, and this was a really nice book to read, but I just thought it was still not enough. Like, it felt sort of inadequate when I was reading it. So yeah, for me this was a 3-star read, and I had expected it to be a 5-star, but I guess it just was not. Okay, so the next book I read this year was 13 Reasons Why by Jay Asher. Reading 13 Reasons Why, this was actually a reread. I picked it up only because the final season of 13 Reasons Why came out on Netflix back in June 5th, and I just thought it would be a great way to like go through the story once again, and I thought, why not just read the book again? So I read the book again. The first time I read the book was back in 2017, and I absolutely hated it. This year when I read it, I understood the book a little better. I realized that I have been suffering from depression for the last 3 years as well, and I could relate to a lot of things that Hannah said. And a lot of people think that the book glorified suicide, but it was not that. I mean, you can look at it if you want to that way, but the book did not glorify suicide. It was just trying to make people understand what a person feels when they commit suicide, or before committing. A person who could just, people just don't come up with their idea of like killing their lives at one go. They think about it quite a lot of times before doing it. So yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed reading it this time around, and I think I rated it as 4 stars, which was quite unexpected, but I just could relate to so many things Hannah said, and I understood it. So yeah, I mean, I really love the series now. The book too. The series is amazing in my opinion, but the book was also good. The next book that I read this year was actually a middle grade book called The Vanderbeekers of 141st Street. This book follows the story of 5 kids who have been living in the same house since their childhood. That's all they remember. The kids age from 12 to 4.5, I think, and all of them love the house they live in. But one day, right before Christmas, their landlord decided not to renew their lease. So their parents come to them and tell them that they won't be living in this house from next year because their lease has not been renewed. The kids are absolutely heartbroken, and they decide that they need to change the mind of their landlord no matter what. So they start coming up with these small plans where they make him breakfast and leave it at his front door, or get him a kitten or play him songs. They start trying to do little things every day for this landlord before they have to move out. So they basically have 11 days left before their parents start moving out, and whatever they do, they have to complete their task by Christmas Eve, because unless their landlord decides to renew their lease before Christmas, they will be moving out. So yeah, this was a very cute story. I really loved reading everything the kids were doing, and the ending was so amazing, the way they get together, and the way we also get to see why the landlord, Mr. Biederman, was so mad at them. What was the reason that he had decided not to renew their lease suddenly. It was just a really sweet book to read about, and I really enjoyed reading it. Okay, so the next book I read this year is actually Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. I have recently started a Harry Potter marathon sort of thing, so I have started reading each book. I will be reading one Harry Potter book every month till December, so that way I can finish reading the series again. It's been a long time since I've read one of the Harry Potter books. The last time I read one book was back in 2018, and it's been 2 years, so why not? that's why I decided that I would be reading one book each month till the end of this year. So I have read 2 books so far. I have read Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone and the Chamber of Secrets, and I have to tell, this is one of the best series that I've had ever in my life. Harry Potter, the first time I read it, I was 8 years old, and now I am much older, and it's still with me here. So I mean, I guess everybody knows what the Harry Potter books are about, and if you don't know, give it a read, because this book is still one of the best books I've read in my life. I love the book so much, and I think reading it this time around, I was reading it more critically, and there were certain things that I thought, oh, as an adult, I don't really enjoy it as much as I did as a kid, but I still rated them 5 stars because these books have so much memories, like hold so much memories. I've grown up reading the Harry Potter books, so yeah, I will never stop loving these books, and I rated both of the books 5 stars. The next book I read this year were actually 3 poetry books. I read 3 poetry books this year, which is very rare. I'm not a very poetry reader sort of person, but I thought, why not? I mean, it's better if I learn some new things, you know. So yeah, I read 3 other books, and I do not want to say their names wrong, so I have them written here. I will see and tell. So the first book I read was Brown Girl Dreaming by Jacqueline Woodson. I loved this book. This was such a nice story, a nice book. It's actually sort of like a story. Jacqueline Woodson tells her life story since she was born, and her family and everything about her being a person of color, growing up in different states in America. She talks about her life in sort of like poetry, in poetry verses. I really enjoyed reading it. The next one I read was Empty Bottles Full of Stories by R.H. Sen. I really liked some of the poems in here. A couple of the poems, I think I have them marked, highlighted in my e-reader. I don't know. I read the e-book because I do not own the copies, unfortunately, but I will be getting them as soon as this situation gets better. And the last one that I read was Electric Ashes by Eve L. Ewing. I hope I'm not saying the name wrong. This one was also pretty nice, and I rated both of these 2, Empty Bottle and Electric Arches, a 3 star each. I think I read only 2 other books this year, so that's it. The next 2 books. The first one is The Switch by Bess O'Leary. I've been hearing people talk about Bess O'Leary's Flat Chair for almost like 6 months or a year now, so I really enjoyed reading The Switch. I haven't read The Flat Chair yet, so I can't really compare the 2 books, but when I picked up The Switch, I thought it was a very sweet story. So The Switch is essentially about a girl named Eileen Cotton. Everyone calls her Lena. The reason she's called Lena is because her grandmother's name is also Eileen Cotton. When she was born, her grandmother was so sick that her mother thought she was not going to make it and decided to name her own daughter Eileen Cotton as well. So the story basically follows the Cotton family woman, Eileen Cotton, the senior, and Eileen Cotton, the junior, which is Lena. Lena has had this tragic incident in her life, and for the last 1 year she has been struggling to get back to her original self. So her boss decides to send her on a sabbatical. She's given 2 months holidays, a 2 months vacation. So she is really not happy about it because she's a very workaholic person, but recently she's not been working really well. So she decides to take a break anyway, and she asks her grandmother whether or not her grandmother would like to switch lives with her. Her grandmother lives in Hamley in Hartsdale, and she lives in London. They switch lives, so she goes to live in her grandmother's house in the outskirts of the countryside, and her grandmother decides to live her life in her flat. It was really in her flat in London. So it was a really nice book to read, in my opinion. It was, we see the relationship they build, we see the life Lena has in Hamley, and the life her grandmother has in London. I think it was a very heartwarming story to read, and I really enjoyed reading it. So yes, I will be recommending this to everyone. I think I rated this a 4 star. this was a nice book to read. This was a great book I read this year. And the last book I read this year was Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe. This book follows the story of this 15-year-old boy who lives in El Paso. His name is Aristotle, and he has always been like an introvert who does not like most of the people in the world, and he has lots of questions in his mind, and he does not understand any secret of the universe. He thinks the universe is so full of so many secrets that he doesn't know about. Now, Aristotle meets this other boy named Dante, and it's mostly about the relationship. Dante and Aristotle start to grow, their friendship. Dante is this very happy soul. He has a lot of the answers, but Aristotle and Dante start looking for the secrets of the universe on their own together. I really enjoyed reading this book, and especially the ending. Dante knows that he is in love with Aristotle, but Ari does not want to believe it. Ari thinks that he is a normal boy, and a normal boy is supposed to like another girl and not a boy. So their story gets complicated from there, and there's a lot of incidents that happen until at the end Ari finally realizes that he also loves Dante. This was such a sweet book. I loved it so much. I thought so many of the things that was said in the books were like, wow, I loved it. And I thought this is like so obvious. I mean, there was a quote, I think, that there are many things in the world that are far worse than a boy wanting to kiss another boy. And I thought, I know, right? I mean, it was such a beautiful book, and I really, really enjoyed it, and I loved it. So yes, I rated it 5 stars out of 5 stars. And this was, I think I read this like a week or so ago, but this was the last one that I read this year, and I am really happy. I have read some really beautiful books this year that I will keep on my favorite list for a very long time, which I'll probably talk about in another video. But for now, this is it. Thank you for watching.